You will not see a single food image today. Not one, zero, because I don't want to hold shiny objects in front of you when you really need to focus on what's important about today. What's important about today is being a business person in this field. And that is more important than the pictures right now. The other times I was here, we talked a lot about pictures, and we talked about social media and how to utilize that. But today is all about business, and this talk grew organically out of a workshop scenario. So I was teaching a workshop in San Francisco about 4 years ago, and I had my curriculum all blocked out. We had 2 days of work, 2 days of shooting, and all the different things surrounding food visuals. Around part of day 2, people started to ask me questions about pricing, about negotiations, about all the different things about producing a food shoot. And it occurred to me that there was a real hunger to discuss these things, because once you've already mastered your camera, once you're already making good visuals, and once you're starting to kind of look for work and figure out how you want to be a professional in this industry, there was nobody talking about that. It was like the big secret. And I never felt that sharing that kind of information, or at least giving people some guidance as to how to negotiate through that, should be a secret. I know the photo world has been a little, the other parts of the photo world that I've been encountering in my career, fashion and photojournalism and some of the other stuff, there's a lot of cutthroat stuff that goes on in that. There's a lot of competition, but being in the food space all these years has taught me a lot about community, and it's really influenced the way I instruct and the way I teach. I was a teacher before I was a photographer. I spent years and years in front of classrooms. I spent years coaching sports and other things. So as far as I'm concerned, when we get into these scenarios, I become your coach, and I want to basically help you understand and kind of wrap your head around the things that you're looking to me for. So what I want to start with, and the funny thing about the notes that you have, those were my notes, and they inadvertently printed them all out and left them on the table up there. And when I came in, I was like, well, I guess that's okay, because I'm going to talk through them. I'm not going to read off them. They were just my kind of talking points, and if they help you kind of have, especially the 10 things that we're going to talk about the questions to ask before you accept a job. I'm going to talk through all of those and why. But feel free to ask questions. This is a give and take. I don't just stand up here and lecture. I want to interface with you and answer specific questions if you have them. If I have good answers for you, all the better. So let's start. Negotiating is an art form in any business, and in particular this business, for me, has always been the idea of understanding what my value is, what a client is looking to me for. Why is it that they came to me instead of anyone else? And part of it is the knowledge. The understanding of food and photography and visuals has been the calling card for me, is that when I get on a call with a client, I can talk them through the whole process. I understand the process, and I understand the idea of why I'm taking pictures of food. I have an emotional connection to food, and I want to bring my audience to that. And if most people who come to food come to it with honest to goodness heart, they really feel it. They want to be involved in food because it means something to them. Food is one of the most emotional subject matters you can attack as a photographer, because everybody has experiences with food. It's connected to your culture. It's connected to your daily life. And when you think about the things that you can navigate through food, I keep a list in my phone of all these terms and words that occur to me and how they connect to food throughout the day. It's a running list of several hundred words, and they have to do with everything from the things I deal in taste and appeal and desirability and sustainability, all these things that are kind of obvious in the kind of work that I do. But then there's other things that occur to me too. There's this knowledge of food's place in the world, food's place in our country versus other countries, and how those things influence my thought process. So being knowledgeable about your subject matter is enormously helpful in negotiations. And then to understand the differences between the clients that you're dealing with. So you're going to get phone calls, you're going to get emails that say, give me a price. And everybody wants to start there. That's the last thing you talk about in negotiations, is the price. Because before you get to the price, we need to know what we're doing. We need to know all kinds of things, and we're going to get to that in our top 10 kind of things to ask. But the first thing to understand is the differences between the different types of clients. We have editorial clients, we have publishing clients, we have advertising clients, and we have private clientele, which could be anything. It could be somebody who wants you to come to a dinner party and photograph it. It could be a caterer. It could be an artisanal shop in your neighborhood. It could be anything. Food is everywhere. So understanding those differences and how you negotiate with those types of clients is really important. Understand what it is that you do to charge for your time, but also understand that the people you need to support you, they charge for their time. Because when somebody comes to you and says, I want you to do this job, well, all of a sudden we're sitting here saying, okay, well, I cost this much. No, don't do that, okay? But I need a stylist, I need somebody who props, I need a person who's gonna shop for me, I need somebody who's gonna plate the food, whatever. However, depending on the extremity of the job, you have to understand those things. And I guess the bend don't break, and to be able to walk away from bad deals is something that is very hard for us when we're freelance in particular, because clearly we wanna work. But the idea of setting bad precedents in any situation in your life, but especially when you're negotiating work, is if you set a bad precedent and then what happens is you do a good job and they want to hire you again, now you're stuck in that slot because it's very hard to go back and ask for more money after you've already negotiated. So you have to enter into negotiations with thinking about what's the least I'll do this job for and still be happy. And that could be different for everybody. There is no, textbook you take out and you turn to page 52 and says, okay, for this job you charge this much. Everybody wants that. They want to pin it up on their desk. It doesn't exist. And it's getting crazier. As we get into the social media age, it's gotten worse and worse. And now, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and all of the big media outlets used to have a standard as to what they would pay people. Oh, it's easy. You want to work for us? This is what we're going to pay you. Now, all of a sudden, they need so much content. Everything is a negotiation. Every job, every bit of anything you do is a negotiation. And it's always about more, more, more. Give me more content, give me more content, give me more content. So the idea is, how much content are you willing to provide for that price? And understand, where's that content going to live? And how much control do you have over it? And we're going to talk about that as well. The only thing I want to talk about is sort of alternate compensation. There's this myth of exposure that media companies and internet kind of entities have been floating out there to content providers like yourselves, right? You provide content, but they've been floating you this myth that, well, if you do this for us cheap or for free, we're going to get you all kinds of exposure because we have 1 million Twitter followers and we have a bunch of Facebook followers and we're going to get you out there. But here's the thing. It's so flooded right now that whatever content you provide is gone in an instant. And that myth of you going to get 50,000 followers because you got retweeted by somebody or you got put out there on somebody's website, it's gone in 2 days. No one will ever see it again. Because the next wave. It's like, think about being out on a surfboard, right? You're sitting there and here comes the giant wave and you try to get on it and you try to ride it and great, you rode it and now you're in and now there's 3 more behind you that are just gonna bury you before you get back out there. And that's exactly what it's like on the internet. So don't buy into the myth of exposure. It's just not true. It's so, look, I've been published in the New York Times multiple thousands of times. I can't even count how many photographs I've put in the New York Times over the past 15 years. You know how many Instagram followers I have? 20,000. So if that myth isn't true by that metric alone, then that proves my point in one very easy thing. It's a mystery how people will get 150,000 followers overnight. I don't know how it happens. I don't understand it. Well, maybe, but I don't. And I don't think there's anybody who can say, and we have this joke now, my wife is also in the business, and we were talking about job postings in media, visual media, and it was like, able to produce viral videos. How do you predict viral videos? You can't. You can't just go out and project, oh, I'm going to make a viral video today for you and you'll have 1 million followers by tomorrow. That's what everybody wants. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. When you're negotiating, you also need to understand that your time is valuable. And it's not just the time you spend on a set. It's all the time you spent leading up to that, and all the time you spend the minute you walk off the set. So if you're doing your own processing, you're doing your own for food photos, if you're doing your own production, all that time is considered pre, post, and in production. And if you don't budget for that, well then think about how many hours you're working for the price you're getting paid, and you're better off flipping burgers if you don't do it right. And there's a lot of times when you're young in this career and you're early and new in this career, you're so excited to do the work, and then all of a sudden you just got preyed on because you just provided them with a tremendous amount of content that took you 4 days to put together of your time, and you only got paid the equivalent of an afternoon's work. And that, unfortunately, is something you need to guard against, and that's really about understanding the entirety of your time commitment to any given job. And you don't want to be the cheap photographer. And somebody told me this in advertising years ago. They said, if you come in at this price with a particular client, you will always be at that price. They will not take you seriously for better work, for better jobs, for bigger jobs, because they already got you pigeonholed. And what they want to do then is add on the work at that rate. And then what you're doing is you're setting a price for yourself that's unsustainable in the work. You can't grow that way. So ultimately, you have to be able to provide your client with a number that you can live with long term. If they become a regular house client, a client that comes back to you over and over again, that's what you want. But you want that at a price that's sustainable, that gives you a livable wage as a photographer. Because it's very easy to get work right now. It's not easy to get well-paying work. And that's the difference. The other thing about educating in negotiation is, and I said this earlier, and it's not just about what a prop stylist costs or how much it costs to rent props. It's also about what does studio rates cost if somebody wants you to shoot in a studio. And if they want you to shoot in your house or somewhere else, that needs to be something that needs to be discussed up front. What is the transportation cost of getting all your stuff to and from everywhere it needs to be? The food has to be paid for by somebody. I went on a cookbook shoot for a major television show that was being produced by an even bigger corporate entity. And when the budget hit the table for a 7-day photo shoot with food, there was no food cost line. There was no line item for food cost. So we said to them, well, this is the budget, but it doesn't include the food. And they were like, well, what's the food gonna cost? It was 50 recipes. The food cost was 20 grand. And their heads exploded because they had no idea that the food was going to cost that much, because you don't just buy one pork chop, you buy 20, right? Because you have to, in a setting like that where you have to have a hero, you have to go through all the food, and there's a tremendous amount of food waste, which is another thing for another day. But it's amazing how many people come at this. But that is definitely something you need to kind of manage and understand for yourself, but also for the edification of your clients. Because no matter how big that client is, if they haven't done food before, they don't understand it. And they don't get how much it costs. And they don't, if they say, oh, we want to execute this. I go through this with book publishers all the time. They say, we want to do X amount of, every negotiation I ever do with a cookbook is, we want 100 plated dishes. Oh, you do, don't you? Okay, you want to pay for me for 10 days, first of all, because I can't do more than 10 in a day, and even 10 is a lot. That's assuming the food isn't that complicated. So you want to pay for me for 10 days. Okay, that's one item. Okay, now add everything you were thinking about. Add an extra plate, an extra fork, an extra dish, an extra cup, more food, more surfaces to shoot on, all of the propping alone. Then food cost for 100 recipes. Then you have to pay people to do all these things, and who's getting it to the shoot, and who's transporting it, and all of a sudden they're looking at the line items and going, oh, I can't afford that. Well, then you can't shoot 100 dishes. And every negotiation starts at 100 dishes, and they all end at 30. So help me God, that's exactly what happens. Every negotiation starts at 100 and ends at 30 because everybody wants to spend 30K. That's what they want to spend. But everybody has the idea that they want to shoot every recipe that they wrote in that book, which is also a mistake visually. But that's, again, that's a different type of a conversation. But the reality is when you get to negotiations, you have to educate the client. And in order to do that, you have to be ultimately the most knowledgeable person in the room. When I sit at a table now, around a table of people to discuss a food visual project, I know I'm the most knowledgeable person at the table because I did my homework. I've done my homework for the last 15 years. And if there's somebody else at that table who also has that type of knowledge, that's just support. Because now they know what it costs to do it. That's not competition, that's support. So the more people around you that know what you do and appreciate it and understand what it takes to make the visuals that we make, you are ultimately in good company in that situation. So more about negotiations later. Copyrights and work for hire. This is a very simple thing to understand in a very complicated landscape. If you work for hire, you do not own your stuff. It's gone. If somebody says, come and work for me and shoot and hand over your files, you no longer own that. But that, again, becomes legally complicated, but you don't want to enrage your clients by suing them in court. So what you need to do is be upfront about what you expect when you're working for any client. If you're going to do a work for hire arrangement, make sure you get paid more money. Plain and simple, because you're surrendering your rights to those images. What I do quite often are two things. Shared copyrights, and I will put a moratorium on the photos where I will not use them in any other venue for X amount of time. So that's more of a courtesy to my clients than it is a capitulation. Because quite honestly, if we're promoting a cookbook, I don't really want to be floating their pictures out on social media or even on, or in my website or putting them up for stock to sell somewhere else, which is totally my right if it's my copyright. I can do that. But I won't surrender my copyright to anybody except advertising because that's different. Advertising is completely different and they're paying for it. But editorial work, publishing work, if you surrender your copyright, it's gone. You're not going to be able to maximize that. Yes. Well, when there is no contract, then there is basically an understanding of intellectual property. If you created the intellectual property, it's yours to do what you want with. Now, of course, if you get involved with a client who then is under the understanding that they own the work, then first of all, the communication was bad to begin with. And secondly, they're wrong. So if you went to court, you'd win. But then again, what that work is worth and what it would cost to defend it in court, that remains to be seen. Depends on what the work is.
So it's just understood if there's no contract that it's a shared thing.
Yeah, well, not necessarily even shared. No, it's yours. It's your intellectual property.
But the point is, if I do a shoot and it's an event thing, for example, it's understood that they're able to use these images, and I'm obviously allowing them to use these images any way they want to.
Sure. Well, that's any way they want to. That's the key phrase in there. I wouldn't necessarily do that unless I was comfortable with the compensation. Any way you want is really huge at this moment. What I would do is I would set parameters and timeframes. And that's usually how I enter into photo contracts, is that if you are interested in owning this imagery for X amount of time to use in this particular way, then it's cost this. If you want to own my imagery, you will own it outright, but I hold the copyright, I hold the masters. I will never use it again, but you can use it any way you want for perpetuity. So that becomes a shared copyright thing, except for the fact is they can't resell it. See, that's the other thing, is that if you give the work away, and this is the big, the content grab that's happening all over the place right now, is people want work for hire content because they want to own it and ultimately want to resell it because there's money in resale. And if you surrender those rights and you don't know control of your imagery anymore, you're going to see it being sold somewhere else eventually. There are stock agencies popping up all over the place. There's an enormous need for content everywhere. And if you are just giving it away, people are more than happy to collect it. and they will amass it, and then they will sell it as a collection, and you will never see it again.
Can you discuss where we can find contracts, templates, and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, online you can find photo contracts. The Freelancers Union, I think, has some templates on their website. And if you just Google freelance photography contract or work for hire contract, any of those things where you could just start to familiarize yourself with the language. I used to need people's help to read those contracts because there were certain things that are tricky legal language that you kind of, it goes right past the normal eye. And then once you train yourself to read those contracts, you understand what they mean by certain phrases and how that's the you're gonna get screwed phrase. It's in there, and you start to recognize it, and you start to correct it. And when you're in a contract situation, if somebody just hands you a contract and says, this is what we want you to do to work, read it. And if there are things on that contract you don't like, scratch it out and put your initials next to it. And then send it back. Because now you've addended that contract. And then they're gonna say, well, what do you want in that place? If they're negotiating. If they're not negotiating, then they'd be like, well, no, it's not negotiable. But you scratch it out, and then you renegotiate that particular phrase. One of the things I put down there at the bottom that I want to explain is bargaining chips. And basically what I mean by bargaining chips in these scenarios is those parameters that I was talking about. So if somebody wants to negotiate with you and you say, well, I want to give you 2 years for this price, and they're like, well, what about 3? That's a bargaining chip then. Then you have a negotiation stance because now they're talking to you. And the more you're knowledgeable about any of these things, the more you're going to be able to, and people aren't scared by knowledge. They expect people, well, I don't know that they expect you to know. They're kind of hoping you don't, but when you come back at them, they deal with enough professionals to know. And the more people in our industry that are armed with this knowledge, the median price of everything goes up. Because then there's not the guy who's doing it for free or nothing or food credit or whatever he's doing it for, okay? And they're not expecting that there's a lot of content providers out there who don't have this knowledge. So it's super important to kind of be as knowledgeable about your rights as a photographer and your rights as a business person in this arrangement, because ultimately it means that everyone makes more money. Because now the people who want content have to deal with an army of people who understand it, not just a few. So then the expectation that, well, we're not going to just come at people with this. You see what happens on Facebook, right? Every time they sneak some weird clause in there about how they're going to own your imagery or whatever, Facebook loses its mind, people go crazy, and then they back off. But doesn't mean they keep trying. They keep trying and they keep trying because what they want is that huge content grab because they have billions and billions of dollars in content if they can get their hands on it. But the general public is wise to them. They don't know all the details, but they know that they want something that we have, and we're not going to give it to them for free. And like I said, the shared rights thing is fair. It's very fair. My contract with the New York Times, going back forever, has been a shared copyright. And there's a short moratorium on the work, meaning once it's published, I think I only have to hold on to it for a week before I can use it somewhere else. Because they understand that wave comes through and nobody pays attention anymore. So I can use my pictures in resale, which is it can become ultimately a big part of my business later on. So as you amass a library of imagery, and if you're shooting events, you're going to be amassing a library of celebrity stuff, and eventually somebody's going to want that and use it. And if you have the rights to those images, you know, a lot of people I know who did your kind of work took pictures of people before they became really famous. And then all of a sudden they got really famous and these pictures were worth a lot of money. And they had their copyrights and they were able to cash in on it. So that's, I mean, when you're shooting people, that's a whole different scenario. Food is different. I mean, unless there are people in your food pictures, like you're shooting celebrity chefs or other food celebrities or TV people. But for the most part, food is a different animal. But when you're talking about that kind of stuff, and all of a sudden somebody you took a picture of 5 years ago gets mega famous, that's, you know, that's all yours. The bankroll is coming. Marketing. This, you can refer to my other talk here too. I did one on social media marketing for photographers. It's very specific to what we do as food photographers. And quite honestly, the space for food in social media is constantly growing. For example, I was approached by an app company a few months back called Foodie, Phoodie, and they asked me if I would be one of their first 5 users or whatever. They were trying to promote themselves as a food-only platform for social media. And they were at South by Southwest, and they were starting to build their profile and whatever. And at this point in time, I mean, since the beginning, I'm the most followed person on their site with like 35,000 followers, which eclipsed my Instagram. Which again, how do you calculate it? Well, I know how that was calculated. I was on their suggested user list, which is the people who you see on Instagram who aren't necessarily really famous were just the first people there. So that's kind of one of those keys. So that's what I saw with that. I saw the opportunity to get in early with a social media site. And if you get in early with any of them, the likelihood that in 5 years, if it's still around, you probably have a huge following. So it's good to kind of keep your eye on the different things that you can market yourself through. Having your own website is essential. Your own blog attached to your website is not a bad idea. I used to blog regularly. It just became too hard to provide free content even for myself. But if you are starting your career and you have interesting stuff that's happening on your shoots, or you have insights that you want to share, it's fine to attach that to or you have other imagery that you want to show, or just to show that you're living the lifestyle. I think that's important, particularly to advertisers. They like when their photographers are living the lifestyle, that you're not just a hired gun, particularly in food. And that's been my experience recently in moving more into the commercial world, is that they like the idea that I live the lifestyle, that this is part of who I am day to day. I'm involved with food, I'm involved with food people, I cook myself, and they like the idea that I'm knowledgeable in that respect. So most of us who have come to this in an honest way we know food, and if you are able to market yourself that way as an expert in anything, people will gravitate to you. So marketing in general is about showing your expertise and being able to push it out there to people who are in the know. So, and again, I'm going to refer you back to the other one because I go into detail about this, but what I recommend for people in the food space is pick a social media outlet that you have the most traction on and only focus your work there. And then don't kind of incorporate your dog pics and pics of your kids and your vacation. You also got to be mindful of the fact that as a professional, if you're vacationing in St. Lucia 4 times a year, they may be looking at you like, that guy costs too much because he definitely has way too much money. You'd be surprised. Yes, if you are showing, I've heard the craziest stories about people who show that they're drinking expensive champagne on social media, show that they vacation in expensive places, drive fancy cars, whatever it might be. It's very hard then for people who are trying to hire you to say, they're already assigning you're in a caste at that point. You are part of the professional caste system. And if you're showing yourself to be really wealthy, or you're holding yourself up here, you may be pricing yourself out of work, believe it or not. So be careful on how you market yourself. It's important. Dealing with clients is really about being as positive as you can be, because it's very frustrating sometimes in our business when you are an expert in your field. If you've gotten to a certain point in food photography, you're obviously an expert at a certain level. And then you're dealing with a lot of people, particularly younger people too, that are not. And they are telling you what you should be doing and how you should be doing it. And you have to basically maintain composure and professionalism and attitude. And it's really easy to let that slip, especially when people challenge you on things that is not true or are true. Or if you find yourself in those positions, by being able to elevate yourself with good attitude in those scenarios is going to help you professionally always, no matter what business you're in. But in this business in particular, you will encounter a lot of people who have a lot less knowledge than you that are trying to hire you for a job. And I kind of talked about that in negotiation as well. So it's good to keep a positive attitude, be a teacher, Educate your clients in a very professional, kind of upbeat way. Say yes a lot. It's very important, particularly at the beginning of your career, to say yes a lot. I mean, you have to be able to work through your negotiations, and I don't mean just about money. I mean about stuff that happens on a shoot, or stuff that happens in pre-production, or even in post-production. Hey, did you get a shot of this? Even though you didn't get that shot, and they know you didn't get that shot. But somebody asked them to ask you to give them that shot. And now your head's ready to explode because you know that person knows, right? And you just have to be like, you know what? Let me go back and look. And you know for sure it's not there, but you're being positive. It's just a simple example. And by the laugh in the room, a lot of you have had that experience. Because nothing is worse for a photographer than when you kill yourself on a shoot, you kill yourself in post-production, you give them the best of the best, and then they call you back going, you have that picture with that guy in the back, and you've had it. You've totally had it. But your attitude in general is a big selling point. The days of the diva photographer are over. They're not, they don't exist anymore. And if they exist, people hate them anyway. Because the reality is that's not the norm anymore. So you can't be the diva anymore. That's why I'm in directing, because we could still be divas on that part of the business. Not really. But you just have to maintain that kind of professionalism and look at every situation as an opportunity to show yourself as the better professional in the room, the most knowledgeable, the most, approachable, accessible, all of that. All of that matters right now because the line is so thin, and there's so much that's being out. There's so much content being provided. There's so many people working that if you can't elevate yourself through every means necessary, including how you present yourself to a client, well then, someone else is going to get that job, or somebody else is going to get that client on the next shoot. So it's an essential thing to be mindful of. So pricing, it's why you all came. Tell me, is that the truth? Of course it is. Okay. You're in the New York market, which means that this is the first time I've ever talked about pricing in the New York market, which means that every other market is different. Wherever you are, the pricing is different. Whatever venue you're in, the pricing is different. Whatever kind of client so here's the thing. First thing to remember, somebody calls you asking for a price, say you don't give prices right away. You don't give price. Be clear. I just had this happen this afternoon. I don't discuss prices on email. I'd be happy to take a call so we could talk about what your needs are. That's where pricing begins. What do you need? Okay, because what everybody wants is, quote me a blanket price, and I could say yes or no to that price. And you have no idea what the scope of the job is. That could be, come in and take one picture. Come in and shoot all day and give us all your files. There's a big difference between those two things. So pricing has to do with so many different aspects of what the job entails. Is it editorial? Okay, well, your editorial rates, and I wrote this in here, your editorial rates in New York City, particularly like the New York Times, it starts at about $200 for a shoot. And that's abominable, and it hasn't changed for a decade. But they're the New York Times, and they don't care. And their contract was written back in the mid-2000s, and they have not changed a word of it. It is what it is. Now, does that mean that's the only thing you can work for them? No. I mean, I've negotiated myself into a different category because of production. Because I have my own studio, I have my own proppers, I have my own props. So I can work prices that are very different. But it took time to build that kind of a business. Wall Street Journal, for example, their day rate's much better. It's $500 a day. Now that's also, you show up and shoot and that's the end of it. It has nothing to do with production. Editorial is easy because the editorial editor is going to tell you what they have, and you can say yay or nay to that work because basically it's about showing up on a set, showing up on already produced situation and shooting and sending in your files. That's it. Where we get into real negotiations is where we're talking about publishing, private clients, and advertising. And that's where you are in your business is about how you can price yourself. So if you're dealing with, let's say, a private client in the beginning of your career, like a restaurant or a private chef or an artisanal company or has a standalone store in Williamsburg or whatever, you can kind of use those editorial guidelines as a starting point for a day rate, where it's like, okay, for me to come and shoot in your space, I'd feel comfortable at this much per day. But these are going to be your expenses. And that would all depend upon the rest of the job. So it's, okay, it's a local restaurant. We want to shoot 10 items off our menu. We want, okay, well, I'll charge you $500 to come in and shoot. Who's cooking the food, blah, 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 and we'll go through that. So let's talk about this. When you're talking about advertising, the pricing in advertising it's enormous. It's such a different situation. But most of the time when you're dealing with advertising, you're already represented by an agent, right? If you're trying to negotiate advertising jobs by yourself, you're going to be at a huge disadvantage because there's so much to know. You have to be able to, and if the new beast in the room comes to you, which is more likely than a big advertising job, is a social media job being pitched at you by a PR person for a big company, that's where you have to be really careful. And I'd like to focus a little bit on that, because the likelihood that you're going to be approached by an advertising agency as a standalone photographer without representation is very unlikely, because I had only been approached maybe 3 times before I had representation, and I was the most prolific food photographer in the market. So the two worlds don't collide. They don't know, the advertising world doesn't pay attention to the editorial world. They just don't. They had no idea who I was, even though everyone in editorial knew who I was. And it goes for all the other editorial photographers who have a reputation. Unless they have representation who's pushing them at advertising agencies, they have no idea who you are. So, but you will, because of your social media presence, be approached by PR companies. And PR companies range in how they approach these things from, we got no money, to we'll throw so much money at you, your head will spin. And it's really unbelievable, and sometimes you have no idea. So here's the scenario I want you to consider. You got an Instagram account, you're putting up your food pictures, and a PR company for a smaller liquor company calls you up. And they're like, we want to do a social media campaign, we really like your work, can you give us a price? That's always how we start, right? Well, you want to know how many images do they want, how do you want to present it, who's the client? That's a big question in social media, because if the client's Nike, you better be really careful about how you sell those pictures to Nike. But if the client is some little liquor company that's kind of, you've never heard of them before, well then you can negotiate yourself into a position of, looking for repeat work. So, for example, I wouldn't start a social media campaign for anything less than $1,000 a day. And what they're gonna want for that $1,000 a day, it depends on what's happening in front of the camera. But if it's like you have a mixologist that they hired who's gonna come and mix drinks and put them on a bar and you're gonna shoot them, nah, $1,000 a day is fine for that. Even $500 a day if you're in a different situation. But you think about it in terms of 1 day's work, 1 day's editing. It's not bad, right? It's like editorial work. But if it's talking about production aspects, like what we're going to talk about in a minute, about how to do a photo job, you need to kind of then consider all of the parameters that these PR people have no idea about, and then factor that into the price, because now they're asking you to be a producer, because they're not going to produce it. If they want to do a food shoot, they're certainly not going to produce it for you. They want you to do it, and they want you to do it for practically nothing. So let's move on, and we can go back to this, and I'm happy to discuss this more once we get through the other aspect of this, which is the 10 essential questions you must ask before accepting a photography assignment. And I'm happy to go back and forth on this if you have questions. But these questions are very essential. What color is your underwear? Oh no, what is your budget? Because you basically might as well be asking them that, because they won't tell you. They will not tell you. Nobody in this business will actually tell you right up front what their budget is. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't ask. It means you should ask, because what it means is it puts them on their heels. Because it means that you know what you're talking about. It's a calling card. If somebody says to you, I want you to work, you say to them, what do you want to pay me? And now we're talking, because it's the same question. They want you to quote a price, you're asking them to quote a price. So now you're at that standoff. Well, how much will you do this for? Well, how much is your budget? Okay, good. We're at a stalemate. Let's move on to the next question. That's essentially all that really does is it diffuses the problem of asking you to do work for money before you know how much you're going to do the work. Hey, I want you to work today. I'll pay you $500. Oh, wow, $500 sounds great. Yeah, you're going to go dig 50 holes in the graveyard. Okay, right? That's exactly what it's like. Because that's what it feels like when you agree to a price and then all of a sudden the rug gets ripped out from under you and you're doing twice as much work as what you anticipated. You look at the number and all of a sudden it's like, oh, these people love me. They want to pay me for my work. And you get really flattered. And we have egos. We're artists, right? You have to put that aside and you have to think of yourself as an artist and a business person. Because if you don't, what's going to happen is you're going to be preyed on as an artist. Because we're vain and we have egos and we get flattered and we know that our work is really personal. And people who want to hire you know that. And they know that if they dangle something in front of you and you jump at it, they got you. It's like fishing. But if you're smart and you understand how to go back and forth on this thing, you'll get a lot more out of your clients and they'll respect you more. They will treat you more like a professional because there's plenty of people that'll jump at that first $500 or whatever it might be. Okay. This is an essential question for all of this, and it's becoming more and more relevant as we move through in this business, is how do you want to use my imagery? Okay? Where is it going to appear? And the difference between it's going to go on a blog, or it's going to go on a website, or it's going to be used in print, or it's going to be floating down the street on the side of a bus. You need to know, because if you don't, they will do whatever they want. And if you don't stipulate it in your contract or in your agreement with the client, they will use those images everywhere and you'll never get paid anymore. The Gerber baby is the greatest example of copyright misuse or whatever. It's not even a copyright because what happened was, 100 and however many years ago, the artist who drew the picture of the Gerber baby did it for a day rate, work for hire, and handed that off to Gerber Company. That has become one of the most iconic images in American advertising and worth millions. But the guy and his family who made that image never saw any of it because he didn't own the rights to his own work. And I just negotiated with Gerber recently, so I brought that up when we were negotiating. It was very funny. I said, when I talk to a group of people, I always use you guys as an example. And they're like, oh, God. But it's really important because, owning your work is, and this is the nightmare scenario. The Gerber situation is the nightmare scenario. But the last thing you want is one of your iconic images. You make an iconic image, something that's really identifiable and something that really speaks to you and defines who you are as an artist. And all of a sudden, it's everywhere. It's completely watered down. You have no control over it. And then somebody comes to you and they're like, oh, you made that picture? Oh, yeah, I saw it in this ad the other day or whatever it was. And you had no control over it. It's really disheartening. You have to have control over your imagery, and you have to do that at the client level. When you're getting ready to take a picture, you need to let them know that you take it seriously and your imagery I want to know where it's going and how it goes wherever is how I'm going to price the work. So if it's going to get used more, it costs more. So there's day rates and there's usage. And a lot of this is lost on people in editorial because we don't really have that, right? But once you move in past editorial, there's usage, even with publishing. Because let's say I shoot a cookbook. Well, I shoot a cookbook and I didn't have any parameters on the contract. Now all of a sudden that cookbook is being printed in 50 languages and I don't get a dime of it. That's a problem. So because it's my problem, because I didn't stipulate, I want this is a US contract. I'm agreeing to you can use these images for this book and its promotion only. They can't resell it, they can't use it in other publications, they cannot use it in additional printings. And if you don't stipulate those things, they will. And I've had it happen to me before I knew better. And all of a sudden I had a book that was published in 50 languages that I didn't get paid any more money for. So how do you want to use my images? Understand what usage means. And it means a lot in, usage in, and I have it in here too, and I use some terminology and I want you to understand. Print is pretty self-explanatory. Web is self-explanatory. Social media is self-explanatory. But now we're going to start to get into advertising language. What is collateral? Collateral is like anything that an advertising company can use anywhere. Bus ads, shelters, freestanding things in a supermarket. Anywhere you see imagery of food, billboards, that's all collateral because there's no specific thing for that. And if you don't understand that that means collateral, and if it's not in your contract that you're getting paid for collateral, well, you're going to lose out because those pictures will appear somewhere. So I recently did an ad for Bumblebee. And part of the negotiation was a collateral negotiation. That was part of the contract. And then I walk into my local supermarket, and there, sticking out of the where they put the tuna on the shelves, is a big banner ad with my pictures on it. And I was like, okay, good thing we negotiated that, because my agent negotiated it. She knew what it all meant, and and made sure that we were paid for it. And if you're not, that's going to happen. I've have relationships with producers and people that I met through the business and along the way. And when you get to that, or agents, right? And if you have a question and somebody's approaching you with this type of a contract, it's good to contact an agent, because an agent's going to say, you already have that kind of work? Well, I'm happy to represent you, because they're going to take 25% off the top. So you don't have to understand all this most of the time. But it's just good to be aware of it, so that if you're negotiating a contract, you can then research these things if you understand the terminology, right? If you never heard the word collateral before and it appeared in a contract, you wouldn't know what to make of it. But now you have a general understanding of what it means. You know that it's valuable, it's worth something, and that you need to tack on to your usage fees. Now, wherever your starting point is, the more of these things that appear in the contract. So like worldwide unlimited use in perpetuity. Those three phrases, right? Which means I can use your image anywhere, anyhow, anytime, forever. That's what those three phrases mean. It took me a while to figure that out. But you think about it. Unlimited worldwide use in perpetuity. You're going to see that on a contract one day. And you're going to know what that means is a buyout. And what that means is $signs. Okay? If somebody wants a buyout of your images, you start at $10,000 an image and work backwards from there, because you'll never get that on a giant job. But if you know that that's the going rate, then you can start to negotiate, and you're still going to make a ton of money if it's on a regular job. So let's say I did a job recently for Lean Cuisine, and we only took 2 pictures, and they wanted a buyout of those 2 pictures. So I could charge them at that. I started there. I started at that rate. You want to buy out of those 2 images, your usage would be $10,000 a piece. And then we negotiate from there. Now, if it was 50 images, we probably wouldn't be starting there. But the idea is that at least you understand that once you get into that, so if you're using that as your starting point, a complete and utter buyout of your imagery is $10,000 an image. Then you can start to parse this out and back off that. Okay, well, you're not using it worldwide. You're not going to use it for collateral. You're not going to use it for print. But I mean, the hierarchy is print is the most expensive right now, and then everything goes down from there. So let's say if if we're looking at this in terms of where I kind of almost put this in almost order the first couple. Print, web, social media, collateral, FSI. Freestanding insert is the stuff that you get in your newspaper, like coupons and stuff like that for like Olive Garden or Red Lobster. Well, there's food imagery on there. And somebody got paid to do that. And that's called FSI. That's called freestanding insert. So that's another category of this. And it's not a super expensive category, but if you don't understand that they're going to use your imagery that way, and then you didn't get paid for it. And again, international and global. International meaning you can use it overseas only. Global means home and away, right? So if it's an international job, it could include US, but again, it doesn't necessarily mean it does. When you say global, that's everywhere. And understand the differences between the word international and global, because those words mean something in contracts when it comes to negotiating photo contracts. How that wording appears is important to how much you should be getting paid. So those things, I know there's a lot to absorb all at once, but if you do more research on the notes that I gave you, you'll start to formulate a little bit more of a thing. But again, you'd be better off seeking out a really good bulldog agent who will do all this for you. Whenever a job comes up, especially one where you got a day rate attached to it, which is pretty much everything, right? Everything has some kind of a day rate attached to it. You're always pushing for more days, and the client is always pushing for less days. So when it comes to a food job, best case scenario, food's easy to make, you got a great team to work with you, and the client is pretty hands-off. You can probably get 10 plated food dishes a day done. That's about max. If you try to shoot more than 10 a day, something's gonna fall apart. And something's gonna go wrong. I try to shoot for 5 to 7 a day because I feel like if you really want to spend the time with the plated food, you'll work better there. And at 5 to 7, it's really hard to get clients to agree to that because they don't want to pay for the extra days on the back end, especially when we're talking about cookbooks and like bigger food jobs. So you want to use those parameters in your mind when somebody is asking you to take a job. How many dishes are we shooting, right? How many days are we shooting them? Okay, we're going to go through these. We're going to go through them fast, and then we'll talk about this as a whole. Where are we shooting? Are we shooting in a restaurant? If we're shooting in a studio, are we shooting in my house? Where are we shooting? Because it matters, because it's all part of the budget. You want me to just show up at a restaurant and shoot? Okay, that's fine. But now we have equipment costs, because now I got to rent lights. It's a different scenario. Is there daylight there? Can I shoot in the kitchen? Will they allow me to? What does it look like in the dining room? Is it dark? What time of day can we shoot there? Shooting in restaurants is a nightmare. And if you don't kind of prepare yourself for getting into those spaces and scout them before you go in and agree to the job, or you don't have an awareness of what the space looks like, now all of a sudden you're behind $3,000 in equipment rental because you can't make the pictures in the scenario because you didn't prepare looking at the space. So where are we shooting is an enormously important question to ask, because everything in that scenario is about preparation and money. So important. Who's cooking the food? And this is really important too, because in a food photo shoot, chefs are not necessarily your best friend, because chefs are artists in their own right, and they're coming at it from their own perspective. They don't necessarily understand that plating food for a diner who's sitting at a table, having it right in front of them at what we call, as food photographers, the diner's perspective. But as a food photographer, I don't always want to shoot the plate like this. The other thing is that plating food for the human eye, sitting in front of it, is one thing. Plating food for a camera, particularly if you like to work in macro lenses like we do in food, should be smaller. And trying to get chefs to plate on smaller plates is like pulling teeth. So you need to understand who's cooking and plating the food, because it's about, and who's cooking and who is styling are necessarily different, aren't necessarily the same question. Because if the answer is who's cooking and styling and the answer is the same person and it's the chef, you're probably not going to have a great shoot. It's going to be really hard. So you need to manage that situation. And if by managing it, I mean you need to communicate with those people what you feel will make the best visuals. And it means I work with a stylist who will just plate the food. Even if the chef doesn't want you coming near the food, at least have your stylist plate the food. That's going to make an enormous difference in your imagery because that person knows how to plate for camera. So the architecture of a food photo plate from diner's perspective and the architecture of something from this perspective at table level or directly over the top are very different. So when I'm telling a stylist to plate the food, so we go into a situation, we have a plate of food, and I'll say, or he or she will say to me, what perspective are we shooting? Oh, we're shooting over the top. Or I'll tell the stylist, plate that for table level. We speak a different language than chefs. We understand food, but we also understand that this is about plate architecture. And if you don't communicate that to your client and whoever's cooking the food. Now, of course, if the answer is we have a food stylist cooking the food and her assistants or his assistants, well, then that's a whole different ballgame. But of course, that costs money. So it's always this push and pull between money and how we're going to get our final product on the plate. And the idea of cooking, styling, plating, all of that is all the difference of money, time, energy. And if your client isn't willing to spend the money to do it that way, and they want to do it, and especially with cookbook clients, because you're going to run into 90% of your cookbook clients are going to be your food stylists, the client themselves. It's either a chef or some type of a blogger or some type of person who is making their living cooking food. And they're not going to want to spend the money on stylists. So you have to communicate, okay, fine, let's negotiate this. Let's figure out what's the best way to get this to work. And then if you're working with other stylists or other people, or you plate your food yourself and you know how to plate the food for camera, get involved in the kitchen. Every food shoot I've ever been involved in, I start in the kitchen. I stay in there with the stylist. I look at what they're doing. I talk to them. I tell them what I want. I tell them how I want the food cut. Tell them what portion sizes I want. I tell them how I want it to hit the plate. Because if you can't communicate that part of the vision, then the back end of your food photography isn't going to work. So this is all about that business. This is the business part of what we do. It's not just about grabbing some plated food and taking a great picture of it. Because you know what? You'll get that once in a while, but every blind squirrel gets a nut once in a while. Right? Once in a while. You want that to be every single time. You want to manage every single aspect of what goes before your camera. So before you actually put your eye to the viewfinder, everything else, you're already working. You're already working to ensure that that picture is what you want. And all of these questions are the things that need to be answered beforehand. Propping is again, depending on the scale of the job, you need to be aware that hiring a prop stylist will take an enormous amount of pressure off of you. And if your client is willing to pay for one, and not just the propper, but the props themselves, and understanding the scale between we're shooting 10 dishes, we're shooting 100 dishes, and how that projects out cost-wise is really important. And having a human being to manage just that aspect of it is an enormous part of what we do in food photography. So just to give you an example of scale, so like a New York Times job, I have my own props. I have an enormous amount of props in my studio. If you've seen any of the videos that they shot of me or in and around my studio, the walls are lined to the ceiling, there's pots and pans hanging off the walls, it's everywhere. And I've been collecting its stuff for a long time, and it helps me in my photography, and I get to rent it out to my clients at times. But there are jobs now on the commercial end where I don't have what they need, because it's not just my vision now, it's their vision. And they have a very specific mood board, and they want to show specific types of propping. So you have to hire a person and give them a big old budget and let them go out and shop and find everything they want and ship it to the studio and pack it up and make sure nothing breaks, and they communicate and interface with the client on that level. And that way, you give them some parameters as to what you want. I want this size. I need 10-inch plates. I don't want any high shine on my silverware. All of those things. But you are being able to kind of manufacture what you're going to see before you actually see it. And that person, even if it's you, on a smaller scale, has to be managing what's going to be the final product from that part of the shoot. So, who is propping? Oh, when do you need finals? Oh, tomorrow, of course. Isn't that always what they want? They want it 5 minutes after you shot it. Now, again, depending on what you're doing. If you're doing your own post-production, you have to have in your mind how much time it takes you to process your pictures. If you're going to hand off drives to your client of raw files and they're going to do it, great. You just need to know that ahead of time, because this is an important kind of aspect, because it's also about your time management. How much time are you going to spend on this job? If there's 100 photos that you're making, you probably took 1,000 or 2,000 or 3, and you got to go through all those pictures and edit it. And once you've edited it down, you're not going to just give them one picture of everything. You're probably going to give them multiples. So you have to manage how much time it's going to take you to do all that, and put your best foot forward doing it, right? Because if you rush through the editing and you rush through the post-production, you're not going to give them a final product that ultimately is your best work. So you need to build the time into it. So let's say a client says to me, I need them in 3 days. I say a week. If they say a week, I say 2. If they say 2 weeks, I say a month. I always push it out as far as possible. And then the great thing about business is under-promise, over-deliver, right? Under-promise, over-deliver. I'll have them to you in a month. Give them to them in 2 weeks. That's why I push it out. It's all about perception and narrative in business, right? Is that if they think that you're working extra hard for them, they're more willing to be easier in negotiations. They want to hire you again. You're easy to work with. But it's all about communication up front. So far, just about everything we've talked about is really about communication. And the more we communicate what our needs are, what our expectations are, all of those things, the better we're going to be at retaining clients and maximizing the amount of money we can make from those clients, and attracting new clients as well. Because word of mouth is huge in this business. So if you're easy to work with, people will know that. If you're a giant pain in the ass, people are going to know that too. And they're going to know it really quickly. Because, people have reputations. And I hear it about photographers, I hear it about stylists, I hear it about proppers. And there are people in the industry who are really high profile that I won't work with, because I know other people who have worked with them and they were a nightmare. And that hurts them, because I have work to give. I'm working, and I want to work with brand name stylists, and I want to work with brand name prop people. I want to work in certain studios. But when you hear a story that this studio is a nightmare because their studio manager is a big pain in the neck, well, why am I going to work there? I'm not going to waste my time. So everything is about how well you communicate with clients, and about, how you want to be perceived. File formats are important, and how you're going to deliver the files. I think that might be the next one. Yeah. These are important things to know up front too, because if you go through an entire cookbook and you process JPEGs and they want TIFFs, you're going to be really upset, because now you got to go back and do it again, or at least reprocess them in a way that they weren't intended for, which you don't want to do. Also about how to deliver files, and I like to know this up front. Do you want me to drop off a drive if you're local? Do you want me to upload to Dropbox? Do you want me to, however you want to do it? Do you want to take the files with you? I need to know these things, because again, it's all about budgeting my time and my resources. Because if they want to drive, you got to budget that in, because a drive for a big photo shoot could be $300 to $400, and you don't want that to come out of your pocket. And all of these things are like the death of 1,000 cuts, right? Is if you don't plan for all of it, all of a sudden, oh, you don't have enough props. You got to go into your pocket for that. Oh, you didn't plan on a hard drive. They wanted that. And you can't negotiate it later. And then little by little, that's all cutting into your profit. And these are little things, but they all end up adding up in the end. So that's my 10. See? No shiny objects today. I got everybody's attention on what we had to talk about today, because I really, I do that on purpose, because it's easy to sit here and for me to talk about pictures. I could sit there and talk about pictures all day, and then we can get bogged down in that. But I really wanted to drill down into the things that are important about what we need to do as business people outside of what we do as artists. And that's why I left the art off the table today. So, but if nobody has any more questions, thank you for coming. You were great today, and see you next time.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.